I always record my audio separately. I use a separate platform because I feel like Zoom just doesn't have as great quality of sound,
Okay.
So so we are recording video, but the audio will be separate. If you're ready,
I
in
am.
3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today with me, I have Dr. Wendy Troxel, and she's a senior behavioral scientist, a licensed clinical psychologist, and a certified behavioral sleep medicine specialist. And she has more than 15 years of clinical and research experience in sleep medicine. Her work has been funded by the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Defense, private foundations, and corporations. Her research is regularly published in top-tier medical journals, and she has written the seminal peer-reviewed academic article on couples and sleep. Wendy has also received numerous awards for her scholarly work. And she also happens to be an author of the fabulous book called Sharing the Covers. And today we're going to talk all about healthy sleep and healthy relationships and how to really keep it balanced. And I find this to be a really great topic because, especially at midlife or even as soon as you have children, if you have children, couples' sleep gets affected by all of this. So this is going to be a great discussion. And I want to welcome you, Dr. Wendy Troxel. Thank you for coming today.
Thanks so much for having me, Sandy. It's really a pleasure to be with you and talk to you about topics that I love very dearly.
Yeah, me too. I do too, because first off, I'm going to ask you, what's your story? How did you get into the science of sleep?
Great question. So I'm a clinical psychologist by training. And when I was getting my PhD, I was studying how and why it is that people who are in close relationships, marital or marital-like relationships, why it is that they tend to live longer, happier, and healthier lives than their unmarried counterparts. And through that research, I actually also found that it's not just being married or being partnered that matters for our health and well-being, but it's actually being in a good quality relationship that matters, that is health beneficial. And so from that, I then started to want to unpack why it is that the quality of our relationships could matter for distal health outcomes, like our risk for cardiovascular disease. And that's really where I stumbled upon sleep. This was nearly 20 years ago now, when the field of sleep was really starting to blossom. And we were getting more and more epidemiologic research out there showing that sleep is critically important for our physical health, our mental health, kind of all aspects of our functioning. And from that, I started to ponder, well, wait a second, here sleep is this critical health behavior. And it's something that most couples actually do together. It's the one health behavior, in fact, that couples regularly engage in together. I mean, you might occasionally go for a run with your partner or, have meals with your partner, but sleep is the thing couples regularly do together. And it's vitally important for our health. And yet virtually no one in the sleep field was studying sleep in the context in which it occurs for most adults, which is with a partner. And so I really sort of stumbled upon it. And from there, I did a postdoctoral training and really sort of dived deeply into the fascinating world of sleep and haven't looked back since. And it's really that merging of my interests in the quality of our relationships and the quality of our sleep and how they intersect in really interesting and meaningful ways that has really fed my, professional career for the past 20 years.
Well, I'm going to say it's a great topic because the one topic that I know I get into all the time with all the women I speak to in my community is how poor sleep can get around perimenopause
Oh, yeah.
and menopause, right? So, and many of us have partners. Many of us sleep with our partners. Many of us don't. So this is going to be a great talk. I can't wait. So let's start with the importance of sleep. Let's go with the basics.
Sure.
Okay. So what is really what we should be getting at this stage in life? Because you know how they always give you the guideline when you're a teenager, you should sleep this many hours. And when you're, so for a midlife person in midlife, what should we be sleeping? And is there a difference between male and female sleep needs?
Great question. So in terms of sort of what is recommended for optimal sleep duration, it's somewhere in the range of 7 to 9 hours for most adults. Now, that is a range that is recommended based on the evidence that, particularly that excessively short sleep is associated with health risks. And that range applies to both men and women, though actually there's some laboratory studies that show that women actually do need more sleep than men. However, the problem is, I think, as a culture, particularly because there's been such a, sleep is having such a moment, there's so much emphasis on sleep duration, as if there's some magic number that if we all just sort of effortfully pursued that number of 8 hours per night or 7 hours per night, everything would magically be great and we would be sleeping perfectly. Well, the reality is sleep duration does matter. And certainly there are health consequences to, sleeping chronically less than, say, 6 hours per night. However, this pursuit of perfection in our sleep and this magic number is really missing the totality of the sleep experience, which is that sleep duration isn't the totality of the sleep experience. Other things like sleep quality and the regularity of our sleep and the consistency of our sleep are equally, if not more important than sleep duration. So I'm not minimizing the importance of trying to achieve that 7 to 9 hour range for most adults, but don't do it at the expense of your sleep quality. Because actually, while there are pretty minor, if any, differences between men and women's sleep needs, where there are whopping differences is that women's sleep quality tends to be significantly poorer than men's. And women are twice as likely as compared to men as having the clinical disorder of insomnia, which is characterized by poor quality, non-refreshing sleep, or inability to fall asleep, or awakenings in the middle of the night with the inability to fall back to sleep. So you might be getting 8 hours of sleep, but if it's broken and poor quality, that is not healthy sleep.
Okay.
And I think a lot of women resonate with that.
Yeah. Why, Wendy? Why is it that women's quality is less than men? Have you studied that?
It's a really open question, and there's some fascinating research happening about sort of biological sex differences in sleep, and also how our, socially prescribed gender roles influence our sleep. And so it's still an open question, but I mean, as probably any woman knows, having children kind of fundamentally changes your sleep forever to some extent.
Yes.
That it's not just, when little ones are waking up in the middle of the night, that, of course your sleep is disrupted then, but for many women, that tendency to never feel really deep sleep the way you did before children kind of is pretty persistent. And there might be an evolutionary basis for this. For instance, that women, as traditionally the primary caretakers, who need to be more attuned to the external environment, including while they're sleeping, so that they can hear, their infants or their children. And again, this resonates with every woman, I've ever spoken to at cocktail parties and everywhere where they, once they find out I'm a sleep researcher, they run to me. Once you have children, like, your brain never fully shuts off. Even when you're sleeping, because you have to be vigilant and aware if a child is calling or if a child is crying. So there's that sort of the sort of women's traditional roles. And of course, there's also biological reasons, which we're still trying to tease apart, which may be hormonally based. It may be related to different sort of wiring in men's and women's brains. We do see different patterns of activation in men's and women's brains during sleep to some extent. So, it's a really fascinating area that we're still actually trying to tease apart.
Yeah, it's like you hear it all the time that I'm like, how can he fall asleep anywhere he goes? I want to be like that. Right? So,
The bane
it's
of many a partner's existence. My partner falls asleep, so easily, and
yeah,
I'm there effortfully working for it. That's definitely one of the challenges that I see,
yeah,
particularly heterosexual couples, when women are statistically more likely to have insomnia, and so the struggle to sleep is real for women. Men
yeah.
also obviously can have insomnia, but women are more likely to.
So, okay. The one thing that I have noticed is that for me, even if my sleep is shortened, which for the last little bit has been, and it's, you're going to laugh, but usually my sleep it gets shorter and shorter up until I cycle back in my bioidentical progesterone, which is a whole other conversation, I know. But progesterone, I know, just kind of helps with that nervous system, that more chill. It's that great hormone that when you're my age at 53, you have often very little of. So for me, that's my situation. However, if my deep sleep is good, I'm okay on that 6 hours.
Hmm.
So maybe we can get into what happens at each phase. So what happens at light? Why is that important? What happens at REM and what happens at deep?
Yeah, well, the reality is, I want to talk about this more globally, because the truth is, what you perceive as deep sleep and what your, whatever tracker you're
Yep.
using may call deep sleep may or may not be deep sleep as we would measure it in the laboratory
Right.
using the gold standard, which is polysomnography. So I want to kind of move away from this heightened focus on trying to pursue certain stages of sleep, or really taking too much stock in, oh, well, I had a lot of deep sleep and therefore I don't need sleep as much.
Yeah.
Again, let's get back to the totality of the sleep experience.
Okay.
Yes, there are different sleep stages from light to deep, and they're scored on a very simple scale, from 1 to 4, but that's really when we have access to all of the measurement that's required to really accurately stage sleep. So it goes from 1 to 4, with 4 being the deepest. And then there's REM sleep, which is the type of sleep where most of our dreams occur. And that's a really unique stage of sleep when there's actually heightened brain activation. It actually looks from a brain perspective like you're awake. But what's important to know is that all stages of sleep serve a function. Very different. For instance, REM is associated with emotional processing and memory consolidation and creativity. Deep sleep is associated with growth and repair and regeneration. But even the lighter stages of sleep are also important. Now, what you said is so important. Now, I don't want to say that getting 6 hours of sleep is enough, because of course there is evidence that chronically, people who don't get enough sleep, which is generally in the range of 7 to 9 hours, there are health risks. That
Yes.
said, we all know that there are times in your life where you may not be able to get that 7 to 9 hours of sleep. But you're right that the quality, can to some extent offset that. So what I want to move people towards is, as opposed to thinking of this sort of dichotomous thinking of, I want to, pursue getting deep sleep or REM sleep, and it's okay if I don't get enough sleep. Really think about trying on most nights to get the whole package, enough
Yeah.
sleep and good quality sleep. And to be honest with you, the best indicator of the quality of your sleep is your perception. Do I wake up feeling awake and alert relatively, maybe not right after the alarm goes off, but soon after? Am
Yeah.
I reaching for coffee or caffeine throughout the day to keep myself awake? That would be a sign that you're compensating for not enough sleep or poor quality sleep. Do I have energy to go throughout my day? Did I feel like my sleep was deep and refreshing? Those are the kind of questions that I want people to start dialing into. So we're not, beholden to these sleep trackers or
I agree.
devices that are sort of arguably accurate anyways. And they can also sort of be anxiety provoking. And they're really not speaking to what we know about sleep, which is, you want to go for the whole package of sleep health. And a lot of that is the subjective experience of how well you sleep, and importantly, how you feel during your day. If you're tanking mid-afternoon with no energy, that's a good indicator that you're either not getting enough sleep or the quality of your sleep wasn't quite up to par. So what are the behaviors you can change to try to optimize that? But that's not about the pursuit, about some number of sleep duration or some percent of deep sleep according to your tracker, because we don't even know if it's accurate.
Okay. I love that because, in my world, everybody I know wears a tracker of some
Right.
sort. And I actually have two, as I was saying to you offline when we were talking, but I also don't lose sight of how I feel.
Right.
And
Because you're the ultimate judge.
yes, and I totally agree with you. Like, you can use your trackers and, there might be something like little signals that will give you, I know I'll look for signs. Like if I see a sudden drop in my heart rate variability, or if I see a stretch where something's showing a pattern that's not usual, then maybe I'll look more closely at what's going on. And then on top of it, how do I feel? Right?
Exactly. And are the things I can change. So
Yeah.
it's like, if you're going to use some measurement tool, like we as scientists always have done, now it's just kind of gone into the individual realm, use it like an experiment, right? That's where data can be very useful. It's not necessarily in the absolute sense of any particular value you get from your watch or your ring or whatever, but it's really, did I notice some within-person change? Did, the quality of my sleep, both based on the tracker as well as my own experience, did it change? And might I reflect on, did I do something different in the previous day, or better yet, the previous week? Because by the way, our sleep experience is really based on the sort of culmination and the package of the behaviors we engage in on a regular basis. Not a one night off kind of thing, because, I could probably get you a great night of sleep, once in a while. I tell my clients this all the time, but what you really want is consistently good quality, predictable sleep. And that's what people who struggle with insomnia don't get. They are on this up and down roller coaster of maybe one good night of sleep followed by successive bad nights. And again, it's really about consistent routines and practicing the behaviors that we know support healthy sleep on a continual basis, not a one night off.
Okay, so before we get into the whole partnership sleep, because that's a whole other discussion, what are some of your, I guess, best advice? What's your best advice? And let's speak specifically to this age category, because I know a lot of people who are desperate. They're like, "Oh my God, like I just can't sleep. And I'm living on sleeping pills." And, so what are your best tips to help us
Sure.
out?
Yeah. So I have lots, but let me dial it down to sort of my three top ones, particularly for, our age group of women in particular. The number one thing, and sorry that this isn't overly sexy, but the number one thing that if you could really dial in could make a big difference in your sleep is maintain a consistent wake up time. Okay. Particularly among women our age, when our children are now, mostly not little ones, we have a little bit more flexibility perhaps in our schedule, and our sleep starts to, be more disrupted, perhaps due to hormonal reasons or just life transitions, lots of reasons why
Teenagers.
Yeah, yes. Blame it on them. It's always easy.
Yeah.
Sleep disruption, it can be pretty normal. So what you want to do is practice habits that help get you back on track rather than continue the derailment. And so having a consistent wake up time is so vitally important. And it's really important to be more effortful about it at this stage when we might have some more flexibility. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, wake up time is the single most important cue to set our internal biological clock or circadian rhythm, which governs our sleep-wake cycle. our wake up time also sort of contributes to when we're likely to experience morning light exposure. And getting light in the morning is another really powerful alerting strategy to make you feel awake and alert in the morning, and also to help set that circadian clock. So
Can
wake
I
up
ask you a
time, really
question?
important. Yeah.
Okay, but that light, because we talk about this a lot in my community, do you have to go outside to get it, or can it be just opening up the shutters and letting that light hit your eyes? And what if it's still dark?
It could be dark. It depends on where you live and what time you wake up. It might actually be dark outside. Now,
Yeah.
outdoor morning light is definitely the best, because sort of the lux is so much greater outside on a sunny day or even on a cloudy day than any artificial light. But the bottom line is, depending on, you may not have light outside, or you may not be able to get outside. If you can, I mean, I have a morning routine where I do take my dogs out every morning, really as the sun's coming up, so I get 10 minutes. That's my goal of light exposure. And it feels really good. It's part of my routine. But there's some parts of the year where, it will be dark out, or I can't do that. Then it's really okay to just use artificial light. It's a great time to use your phone. In fact, be in rooms in the house that have a lot of bright light. That would be your kitchen, your bathroom. Really just focus on sort of flooding the room or wherever you are with light. And by the same token, you want to flip that strategy as you approach bedtime. Yeah. People don't recognize how powerful light is for influencing our sleep-wake cycles. So that's the first step, to wake up at the same time of day every day of the week. That means, Sunday to Sunday, and try to get light exposure if you can.
And that's even if you go to bed later, because let's say if you have, because what's really funny, you say that, because if I go out for a dinner or something like that with friends and I go to bed, I'm usually in my bed by 9:30. I'm like an old lady, a little old lady, and I'm not old yet, but I'll go to bed between 9:30 and 10, asleep by 10:30. And then I usually wake up at like 5:30, 6, something like that, between a half hour usually. But if I go out for a night and I get home, let's say at 1 a.m. or whatever, I still wake up that early, and it drives me crazy. But you're saying I should.
Well, I'm saying it's not the end of the world. It does show that your circadian rhythm is doing its job. It is locked in to that, because the wake up time is really an anchor for your circadian rhythm. I mean, so I don't think it's the end of the world, because guess what happens? The next night, you're likely to sleep more deeply and have a really good quality sleep if you get right back on schedule, because the other factor that controls our sleep, in addition to our circadian rhythm, is what's called our sleep drive or sleep pressure. So if you slightly restrict your sleep schedule by going out later and still waking up at the same time, you're actually instituting a mechanism to perhaps induce, deeper sleep the next night, because you'll have more sleep pressure.
Yeah,
I'm not recommending. We don't. Generally speaking, we want to stick to regular, fairly consistent schedules. But guess what? I'm a human being. I realize lives happen, and people should live their lives, and sleep fits in there. So yeah, there'll be some nights where you're not able to stick to your bedtime. But it is really important to keep wake up time, I would say, at least within an hour or two of your usual wake up time. And I say that because I have teenagers and I work with teenagers. And I know that that's a group that needs a little bit of catch up sleep on the weekend, because they're so sleep deprived during the week. But again, because of school. But again, and for the rest of us too, if you're going to sleep in on the weekends, just try to rein it in, because our circadian rhythms don't respond well to really large shifts in wake up time. So no more than a 2-hour difference between, let's say, weekday and wake up time. Okay. Let's flip to the sort of the nighttime routine. That's the other area where I see particularly women of our age struggling. And the perennial complaint that, I get in my clinic is, Wendy, Dr. Troxel, I get into bed and my mind just will not shut off. And then we walk through the night and I, sort of ask them what are the steps that get you to bed when your mind is, actually running. And what I hear is this sort of litany of activities of like constantly, racing from work to family responsibilities to doing one more load of laundry to, putting gym clothes out for the next morning, this sort of race that is occurring prior to bed. And then you
Yes.
wonder, why is it that your brain doesn't just shut down when it's time for sleep? Well, that's missing a fundamental truth about sleep, which is that it's a very complex physiological process. And we want to think about falling into sleep like a plane slowly descending into landing. Crash landings just don't feel good and they don't work.
Mm.
Our sleep is a complicated physiological process, and we cannot just, flip the switch in our brain and say, okay, I've been racing around, I've got adrenaline pumping, my head hits the pillow, now turn off. That's not how our brains were hardwired.
Can I ask you something? Because I find that really interesting, because something just came to mind, because I've spoken with women who are exactly what you said. They can't turn off. And then there are others who are like these like busy little bees, rabbits, going all day, working out at 7 o'clock at night, and all these things. And then they hit the pillow and it's like somebody slammed into them and they are out. That's also not good, is it either? Because you said crash landing. So that's what kind of came to mind.
Well, of course, we all are sort of individuals and we have individual differences, and it would be hard for me to tell. Perhaps those people who are, busy little bees running around, they might be just chronically sleep deprived, perhaps. Or they're just
Okay.
great
Yeah.
sleepers. And so, yeah, their head hits the pillow because they have so much sleep drive. Or maybe they've got lots of other things that their busy lives are, keeping, and they're following other good sleep habits, like having a consistent wake up routine. And so they're able to settle down really quickly. I will say most of us don't respond that way, that our brains and our bodies need some wind down time. And we have to, as women, do a better job of carving out some amount of time before your head hits the pillow to engage in some relaxing and pleasurable, routine to set your brain and your body up that bedtime is near. And again, people get, worried about, oh, there has to be some elaborate, nighttime ritual. It doesn't. It might be reading a book. It might be cuddling with your partner. It might be taking a bath. Something for, 20 minutes to up to an hour, something that really sets the stage for sleep so that you don't approach bed as if it's this crash landing.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Totally.
Okay. Now, the final tip that I would be remiss if I didn't mention, because it's so common among our age group of women in particular, that there are going to be nights. And again, here I'm talking to people who don't have the clinical disorder of insomnia. For that, you really do need to seek treatment. And by the way, the most evidence-based treatment for insomnia does not come in a pill. It is actually a behavioral therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So just to disabuse people of that idea that, oh, if you're nightly struggling with sleep, yeah, you probably have a clinical disorder and you should seek a professional. But do not fall into the misconception, the myth that a pill is your only or even the best solution, because study after study has actually shown that this one treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, is the most effective treatment, even as compared to all available drugs on the market.
Excellent.
So this is for kind of people who have, once in a while, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're not able to fall asleep. There's that witching hour that many of us experience around 3 or 4 a.m. Or maybe you get into bed and your mind is just racing and you start lying there in bed awake and you can't fall asleep. And then you start getting frustrated. So here's what you do if you're in bed for half an hour or more, and base that on your judgment of that. I actually don't want you ever looking at the clock in the middle of the night, because no good ever comes of that. Nobody ever wants to see that it's 3 o'clock in the morning. All that's going to do is, instigate negative emotions and frustration. Right. So if you wake up in the middle of the night, or if you're struggling to fall asleep and it feels like a half an hour or more has passed, the best strategy you can do is actually abandon sleep for that moment. And what I mean by that is to actually get out of bed. Get out of bed, go to another room, ideally, or if space is limited, maybe go to a chair in your bedroom, but get out of bed and go do some quiet, relaxing, but distracting activity that you can engage in that will get your mind off the fact that you're not sleeping. So this might be reading a book, listening to a podcast, doing a crossword puzzle, flipping through a magazine. And the idea here, and this is a very science-backed strategy that I use myself when I have those nights, when I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. That's my witching hour. And it happens, but I follow this habit. And that's why I don't, that sort of, once in a while experience of waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm not creating a habit of chronically waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and then being frustrated in bed. It's become self-perpetuating. So you might find if you get out of bed when you're not sleeping, you distract, you sort of abandon for a moment the idea of sleeping. So you're not working so hard to sleep, which just doesn't work. You might actually find that you get sleepy again. And at that point, you return to bed. And you might actually find that by sort of letting go of the effort to sleep, sleep actually returns to you. So that's my third most recommended strategy.
Love that so much because, as I was explaining, I sometimes wake up too early. So I'll wake up, if I wake up at 5, sometimes I'm like, oh, geez, what am I doing? It's 5 o'clock in the morning. And so I actually do exactly what you mentioned. I'll sometimes put on a podcast that has a really nice, soothing voice, or I'll put on an Audible book and something that is beneficial. So I get almost like the subliminal messaging, like something soft, meaningful. I love that you said that. So what I'm doing is not wrong.
And most importantly, you're not lying there. Most importantly, you're not lying there working to sleep and getting anxious and frustrated and start thinking about your day, because all of that sort of mental agitation becomes habit forming. And the last thing we want is for sleep to become sort of like, the experience of being in the dentist chair, like that it's like, oh, like this is the time to grit your teeth and bear down. That's not what we want. We want sleep to be a process we gently fall into. We can't chase it, because when you chase sleep, it will elude you.
Yeah. Rumination is just the worst. I mean, I think that's like the worst. I know I've been there before. So let's get into sleeping with partners, because I did read your book. And for anybody who is listening, I really strongly suggest you go and get Dr. Wendy Troxel's book, Sharing the Covers. Because here's the thing. I'm going to preface the question with my story. My husband is a snorer, and at times it can get intense. And years ago, many years ago, we've been married almost 23 years now, but years ago, it was this whole guilt thing. Oh, well, we have to sleep together. Oh, we have to I have to suck it up. And then he'd be like, well, I sleep fine. And I'm like, of course you sleep fine. Right. But here I am just
I'm suffering.
Yeah. But I'm like, I wanted to kill him every morning, and I hated him and I hated life, and I wasn't getting the sleep. And then we're like, well, why are we struggling with this? Like, then he wasn't happy that I was miserable. And sometimes he still comes into our room in the mornings. He'll come in and I'm like, don't come in before 5 a.m. Right? Like, don't come in. And so sometimes he still does, but the facts are most of the time we sleep separate, and it's been this way for many years.
Now,
I'm going to talk
a happy and healthy relationship. Yes,
we do. And this happened many years ago when we decided to, and I hate the term sleep divorce.
As do I.
Because the facts are, we're not sleeping apart because we hate each other. We are sleeping apart because we are honoring what each other needs. Right?
I call it a sleep alliance.
Yeah,
you're right.
I like that.
You're relying on what is going to work best for you as an individual couple. No one else gets to dictate that.
Yeah.
And people often assume that I'm prescribing, couples sleeping apart or together. That couldn't be further from the truth. What I'm doing is opening up the door through solid scientific research, which I've been doing for 20 years, and putting it forth that the best thing you can do for your relationship is to prioritize both you and your partner's sleep quality, because we know from solid scientific evidence that good sleep quality benefits critical relationship skills Whereas on the other hand, if you're chronically sleep deprived, that can really lead you on a toxic path towards really the, again, most toxic behaviors in a relationship. And so rather than using these really negatively, infused words like a sleep divorce, which automatically implies, relationship rupture,
Yeah.
couples who make the decision that's going to benefit them the most, including sleeping apart, that's creating a sleep alliance. It's recognizing the central role that sleep plays, not only in your individual health and well-being, but also for your relationship health. And that's one of the best things you can do to support your relationship health. We know that from good science.
Yeah. Okay. So the science says what? Do
Mhm.
we sleep better apart or together? Because that's another stigma. And I just want to just talk about the stigma because I remember my mom saying, "Are you sure that's okay for your marriage?"
Right.
Right. And my mom is very old school, but not as in the Crown old school where everyone has separate quarters, right? But as in old school where you have to sleep with your partner for the health of the
Oh,
marriage. And there's that stigma. And I'm
right.
like, yeah, everything's cool, mom. Like, it's all
Yeah,
good.
so that was one of the really fun and sort of exciting parts of doing the research for my book, that I met with
Yeah.
historians and sociologists, and really trying to, again, unpack the stigma around how we should or shouldn't sleep together, which again is societally prescribed, and it's changed throughout history. It is not science-based. So again, as you mentioned, from like the Crown, et cetera, our, society's sort of patterns of sleeping together or apart and what was considered stigmatized at different times throughout history has
Yeah.
vacillated considerably. It used to be de rigueur, in the Victorian era, for instance, that, couples who could afford to sleep apart absolutely would. That was a sign of the upper class. And yet, and then you can sort of swing, forward again to the 1960s and the sexual revolution, because, prior to that, even like in the 1950s, we had these images of healthy, happy couples sleeping apart, including on TV, Lucy and
Yeah.
Ricky, a real married couple on television, sleeping in separate twin beds on the I Love Lucy show. That was a
Right.
requirement actually in Hollywood at the time, because, sleeping apart was sort of, the sort of sensibility of the time, that the sort of a conservative sensibility. But then you swing to the 1960s, that's where we really started to see this backlash and this stigma suddenly attached to sleeping apart, necessarily indicating that that is a sign of a loveless or sexless union. So
Right.
like sort of we shifted towards equating sort of the sort of literal meaning of sleeping together, with the biblical meaning of sleeping together, i.e. sex. So,
Right.
if you weren't sleeping together, you weren't sleeping together as in
Right.
sex. And
Right.
so we carry this stigma, again, that's changed throughout the time. So again, there's no like, truth with a capital T to it, because this is just society's messaging, not actually science-based. And to your point about what the science shows, that's also a bit contradictory. The truth of the matter is, when we measure people's sleep, when they share a bed with a partner versus not, and there's not a lot of studies on this, it's still pretty limited, but the existing studies for the most part show that when you share a bed with a partner, objectively speaking, that is when we measure movement and other indicators of objective sleep, people actually sleep worse when sharing a bed. However, if you ask those same people who, we just measured their sleep while together versus, without their partner, if you ask those same people, do you prefer to sleep with your partner or do you prefer to sleep apart? Those same people in these research studies will say they prefer to sleep with their partner and that they subjectively sleep better with their partner.
Yes.
Love about this is what it says is there's not one right way or one wrong way. And again, this is for couples to decide what works best for them. It also shows that there can be this disjunct between some of our objective measures of sleep and the subjective experience of sleep. And what I talk about in my book is that for some couples who do benefit from sleeping together. It's really the psychological benefits that they experience. It's that experience of feeling safe and secure with
Yes.
a loved and trusted other that psychologically benefits their sleep, even though there might actually be some objective disruption. But the truth is, if we sort of hone in on like that aspect of what a relationship can give, that it's that feeling of safety and security, even for couples who don't choose to sleep together, there are ways to sort of foster those feelings, at bedtime before you maybe go to separate beds, of closeness and safety and security. And that's one of the greatest benefits that relationships can have for our sleep.
Yeah, no, you're talking about fostering that connection, that, relationship. And see, for myself and my husband, we are different in schedules. So it
Mhm.
never felt like, okay, now you go to your bedroom and I go to my bedroom. It just never felt that way because I go to bed so early and he
Yeah,
goes to bed at midnight or 12:30. And that's just the
right.
way it is. So it's like we have our routine
Yeah.
before I go upstairs and I go to bed, and then
Mhm.
he does whatever he does, and he usually works after I go to bed. That's his
Yeah.
routine. So it never felt that way. So I love that you said, do something that provides you with that connectedness, whatever it might be, and whatever suits you and your partner.
Yeah. And because it's really that pre-bedtime ritual that so many couples now are forsaking because we're on, our phones or devices, instead of this really important opportunity to connect with our partner before you actually go to sleep. That's so important because it's often that time before either one of you goes to bed is often sort of the only quiet time with fewer distractions than the rest of your day that you actually can connect. And yeah, you're right. You mentioned, just because you love a person does not mean you're matched in terms of your circadian rhythms. You're more of a morning person. Your
Yeah.
husband's more of an evening person. What I see clinically, and I talk in my book, is the resentment that occurs in many couples when, because there's this belief that, well, as a couple, we have to follow the same, bedtimes and wake up times.
Mhm.
But if you're an evening person, let's say your husband tried to, follow you to bed at 9:30 p.m. because, that's his spouse's bedtime and that's what couples do. Guess what's going to happen to him when he gets in bed as a night owl who's simply biologically not ready for sleep at that point?
Yeah.
He's going to lie in bed looking at the ceiling, gritting his teeth and feeling resentful at you because, he's trying to override his biology, which naturally tells him that he is a person who tends to stay up later and sleep in later. So I think instead of like trying to sort of be perfectly in sync, which is just not going to happen for all couples because there are some mismatched pairs in terms of circadian rhythms, but you can still sort of preserve that critical time together before falling asleep. And I talk in my book about some exercises, simple ones that couples can engage in to really foster that connection and sense of safety and security that is beneficial not only for your sleep, but also for your relationship. And it doesn't have to take a lot of time. It can be part of a wind down ritual together before perhaps you go your separate ways.
Yeah, no, I like that. Okay. I'm going to use the term again just because people know it. Can a sleep divorce actually lead to a real divorce?
If I'm honest, I've talked to lots and lots of couples
Yeah.
in my profession, and there are times where I have seen couples who have chosen to sleep apart from each other, have a sleep divorce, and yes, the relationship has subsequently ruptured. I will tell you though that you'd be hard pressed to find an experience where the sleep divorce was the causative
Mm,
role in the relationship demise. The sleep divorce may have been a symptom of other relationship issues. But what I most often see, and what I hear very much from couples who actively choose to sleep apart for the sake of their relationship, is that they actually find benefits to their relationship. Because
Mhm.
what we do know is that, when you're getting the sleep you need, you're a better communicator, you're less prone to conflict, you're more empathic towards your partner. And, all these skills that are really sort of the building blocks of healthy relationships, they're the sort of, these types of skills, having empathy, being able to communicate, being able to regulate your emotions. These are the skills that we have in relationships that allow even healthy couples to have a conflict, but not allow it to, spiral out into World War III. On the other hand, couples who, are chronically sleep deprived for whatever reason, including the fact that they're just they're not compatible in bed, and one partner is keeping the other partner up, for instance, they are honestly on a shaky path towards relationship demise as well, because if you're chronically sleep deprived, it's really hard to be a good partner.
Mm.
So, and long and short of it is no, I mean, yes, I'm sure there are some instances where divorce is really probably a symptom
Yeah.
of other things going on in the relationship. And yes, there might be an actual relationship rupture down the road. But for many couples who actively talk about the issues that are happening in bed regarding their sleep and come to a strategy that's going to work for them, that's actually a part of a healthy relationship. Healthy relationships happen both day and night. And it's about opening the door to having communication with your partner in an unstigmatized, not defensive way about, how can we address this is a we issue.
Yeah.
If one of us isn't sleeping well, that affects both of us. So let's open the door to all sorts of possibilities to experiment what works for us and what doesn't work for us. There is not a one size fits all approach for all couples. It's really about the couple being willing and open and honest to have these conversations about making sleep a cornerstone in the quality of their relationship.
So, what are some techniques that you would suggest for a couple when there's a misalignment? When one person really, really wants to sleep apart, but the other person just can't get over the stigma
Right.
behind it. And then also maybe that other person really loves that psychological benefit that we were talking about earlier, and it's really important to them. What are some techniques that a couple such as this could go and, work on?
Yeah. So my best strategy for couples like that, and this is often what I see when couples come into my clinic, what I work with them on doing is really moving away from the all or nothing thinking that really puts them at sort of at loggerheads, that one
Yeah.
partner is like ready to go and like will do anything to protect their sleep and like is totally on board for sleeping in separate bedrooms. And the other partner feels like, no, this goes against my beliefs. I love that. This means that we're never going to sleep together again. And so there's no opportunity for compromise or negotiation. So what I'll often work with people, with couples in doing is saying, listen, you each have different views about what's going to help you, and they're very strong views and both are valid. Maybe we don't have to be so all or nothing thinking about this. Maybe we treat this as a trial or an experiment, maybe to suit, Susie, for instance, who really is desperate for sleep and really wants to sleep apart from her snoring partner. Maybe, why don't we say, why don't you guys for the next, week or so, 2 nights a week, why don't you sleep apart? Or maybe during the weekdays, if
Yeah.
you both have really active and stressful work schedules, and it's that vital for both your work and your family life that you get good quality sleep, that both of you do, maybe you experiment with, okay, during the work week, we're going to sleep apart, but on the weekends when, it doesn't matter quite as much and the pressure is lower, then we'll sleep together again. Let's test this one out. And let's really use it as a scientific process, not a you're right, I'm wrong, or vice versa. And where, again, you can't find compromise. Let's see our own data. Let's see how we feel. Did I actually sleep better when sleeping apart? So, the person who is actively wanting to, make the move towards sleeping apart, they'll both actually get some data on this. And it may not be that the partner is the source of their sleep problems. On the other hand, the partner who is really resistant to the idea of like what this will mean to our relationship if we try this out, this is just a trial period anyway. So it doesn't have to mean anything this is not forever in your relationship. And, did you, feel, was it a tremendous sense of loss? Were you able to cope on those 2 nights? And at the same time, recognizing that there can be, some loss of closeness and security and that comfort you feel while sleeping next to the partner. How do you amp up some of those, closeness and, connection behaviors, even when not sleeping together? And so for many couples, it's about, intimacy is a concern. So, if you're going to do this as an experiment for a time, be proactive about saying, okay, maybe the, spontaneous sex is not going to happen because we're not, in bed together every night, but, scheduled sex also works. And many, healthy, long-lasting couples, in
Absolutely.
fact, scheduled sex is more the norm than spontaneous sex. So
especially if you have kids.
Exactly, right? This idea that sex only happens when it's impulsive and spontaneous
No.
it is really, not quite reality anymore. So I think, first of all, just saying that you're not necessarily jumping into, a sleep divorce or something permanent. We are, for the sake of our relationship, going to test this out on a really trial basis. And we're going to, check in with each other. That's how couples sort of move the needle and maybe find a new strategy that works for both of them. And it doesn't make one person right and the other wrong. It really honors both partners' needs and feelings and concerns, which honestly is, a healthy relationship strategy, whether you're negotiating the night or daytime issues as well.
Yeah, I like that. And it kind of made me giggle a little inside when you said, figure out your own data. So at one point I had to record my husband snoring because he didn't think he snored. I'm like, you snore and it's bad because he didn't believe it. And that, I think, is really common with
Yes,
people who snore, right? You would know that
absolutely.
they don't often know that they're snoring like that. So I had to prove it. I had to gather the data, Wendy.
Oh, yes. Well, it's been said that, snoring and sleep apnea is also a disease of listeners, because it's often the bed partner that's the casualty of snoring. And I would be remiss to say, if you're, sleeping with somebody who chronically snores, is gasping for air, it's more than a nuisance. It could be. And it's important not only to protect your own sleep, but also to use that information, that data, to encourage your partner, if he hasn't already, to see his doctor to make sure that the snoring isn't a sign of a significant sleep disorder like sleep apnea, because there are health consequences associated with untreated sleep apnea. So that's my other sort of PSA on that one.
Yeah, and we have done that, and there is no sleep apnea. So
well, that's good. He's
there
he's
you
a
go.
Snorer, but it
he's
affects
just
you.
born to snore. So there you go. Okay, so I want to just talk about a couple of polls that I did on my Instagram because they were just kind of fun. I wanted to get people's input, just who are in my community. I asked one question: do you always sleep with your partner? And it was interesting. It wasn't 50-50. It was 57% said yes, 36% no, and 7% sometimes. So like what you said, so the whole compromise thing that you were just talking about, it sounds like there's not that much compromising going on, like meaning the sometimes, like on weekends, or what you were saying. What do you think about that?
Well, first of all, I think you must have a really good relationship with your audience, because they were being honest, because those data on 36% sleeping apart, that's slightly higher than what we see in national surveys. But I honestly think it's because they're being honest, that there's still, when we do national surveys of people, whether people are sleeping with a partner or not, it tends to be around 25% will say they're not regularly sleeping with a partner. But yeah, I mean, I think, again, part of my goal in, writing my book, doing interviews like this is, if we can just open the conversation about the role of sleep in the health of our relationships, and that, relationships operate in a 24-hour cycle, we can't just like separate our sleep and like we just neglect that aspect of our coupled existence. I think if we open the door to these conversations, couples can come up with lots of creative solutions, and it doesn't have to be this all or nothing. Like, for instance, there are times in a couple's, history where there might be some real benefits, even for couples who normally sleep very well together. Let's say if you have an infant or a toddler who's waking up in the middle of the night. I know that, my husband and I at that time, and plenty of couples that I've worked with, have found that the best strategy to manage sleep deprivation in both partners, so you don't both become, just chronically sleep deprived, would be to sleep apart occasionally.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that, one night my husband could be on the nighttime call duty and I could have a solid night of sleep that I so desperately needed to
Yeah.
avoid that accumulation of sleep debt. That is really when things start to fall apart. So yeah, I think that if just by opening up the conversation that, this social prescription that there's only one way for couples to sleep and that's the right way, it's really not true. And so there can be variability across couples. What works for you might not work for me and my partner, but it's also true within your own relationship. There may be times in your life that you might want to experiment with different strategies for the sake of protecting your sleep and supporting the quality of your relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really wanted to have this conversation with you because, first off, you're a scientist in this area. You are an expert. You see all of it. You see the data. You analyze the data. And secondly, I am going to say the reason I actually had the conversation with my husband was because I read an article saying it was okay. And so these conversations, I feel, are so important because we're taught that it's not okay, just from societal beliefs and the stigmas and all of that attached to it. We're taught that, it's not great to do this. So when I read that article, I was like, and, my husband and I had the discussion about it and, we both agreed, and it was easy for us because we both agreed.
Right.
Right.
We do have to move away from the shame.
Yes.
That keeps couples bound into strategies that might just or sleeping arrangements that may simply not be the best choice for them. Let's move away from the shame and instead allow couples, give them the freedom to decide what works for them in this critical 1/3 of our lives
Yeah.
that we spend asleep. And it's a critical portion of our, coupled existence, right?
Yeah.
Let's not fall back on shame and stigma and what society says we should do, which keeps us trapped. Instead, couples should have the freedom to make choices that work for them both day and night.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to wrap up soon, but I do want to talk about the second question I asked and reveal the answers to this question from another poll. And that was, do you feel like you have to sleep with your partner for the health of your relationship? And here are the answers. 43% said yes. And 57% said no. I mean, granted, everyone, we have to take into account that this is not an actual study. This is a small sample of people within my community, but I thought that was kind of interesting too.
Yeah, the follow-up to that question would be, do you think that how well you sleep matters for your relationship? Would be an important follow-up question because that's the bottom line. That's where the science is absolutely clear. Like this is, there's really no evidence that how a couple sleeps is a sign of a healthy or an unhealthy relationship, but rather what is absolutely clear is if you don't sleep well, it's really hard to be a good partner. And I think that's the question that people should be honing in on more is like, okay, are you aware of how much your sleep affects the quality of your relationship? And if we can tune people into that, then again, it opens up the motivation to do everything we can to support the quality and consistency of our sleep. And again, that's another great motivator. We talk so much about the importance of our sleep or our individual health and well-being, but let's actually dial it up a notch and also recognize how vitally important it is for the quality of our relationships. And by doing that, we can actually really motivate other positive health behaviors to support healthy sleep.
All right. This has been such a great talk. Is there anything that we forgot that you'd like to mention? Anything?
Well, I'm sure we could go on and on for
I know.
hours, but maybe to be continued. But no, this has been delightful, and I'm so happy. I think just to get to talk to you about your experience and really to open up the door to other couples who might be feeling sort of closeted about even thinking about maybe we ought to consider some change in our sleeping relationship. And again, it's not that sleeping apart is the strategy for all couples. It's simply being open to having a conversation about what's working and what's not working in the bedroom when it comes to sleep, and what are some strategies that you as an individual couple can engage in to optimize your collective sleep as a couple.
All right. Where can we find you? Where can we find your book? Let us know.
Yeah, so my book, Sharing the Covers, Every Couple's Guide to Better Sleep, is available at all major online retailers. It's out there. You can also find me on Twitter at Wendy Troxel, and my Instagram is Sharing the Covers. And I also have a website, wendytroxel.com, and you'll see me in the media as various research articles that I am publishing come out. So I'm around.
Yes. Yeah. And you can also find some of Wendy's. I think there were at least a couple of TED Talks that you did as well.
That's true. Thank you. Yes, I have a TED Talk on the role of early school start times in contributing to the epidemic of teen sleep
Yes. I
deprivation.
watched that.
Yes,
that.
very
So
important.
good.
And that's really been a catalyst, I'm happy to say, for change across districts across the country, and even states like California that now mandate healthy school start times across the state for most schools. And I also have a TED Talk on this very topic, why you should sleep like your relationship depends on it. So check them out as well.
Yeah, they're amazing. You know what? I'm going to link those in the description, and I will make sure that I put your website and all your social media handles